You didn't leave because you stopped caring. You left because you cared so much, for so long, about someone who never once asked how you were doing inside. Not really, not in the way that mattered. You poured yourself into that relationship the way people pour water into a cracked jar, endlessly, faithfully, watching it drain away, and somehow convincing yourself that if you just poured a little more, the cracks would seal themselves. They never did. And somewhere in the quiet, in the exhausted silence that follows years of giving without receiving, something shifted in you. Something woke up, not with a dramatic announcement, not with anger or a declaration. It woke up the way the sun rises, slowly, then all at once. And when it did, you made the hardest, healthiest, most courageous decision of your life. You walked away. What happened next is what nobody warned you about. Because the moment you left, something began to unravel, not in you, but in them. The person who seemed so confident, so in control, so unmovable, they began to fracture. And the psychological process that followed is something that requires more than gossip or vindication to understand. It requires honesty. It requires depth. And it requires you to finally understand the dynamic you are living inside of. Because only when you understand it completely can you truly be free from it. Here's what most people get wrong about narcissists. They assume that the narcissist's confidence is real. They see the way a narcissist walks into a room and commands attention, the way they speak with certainty, the way they deflect every criticism without so much as flinching, and they conclude that this person must be deeply secure. But that confidence is not a foundation. It is a performance. Beneath every grandiose display, beneath every dismissal, beneath every moment where they made you feel small so they could feel large, there was something fragile being protected. A self-image so brittle that it could not survive without constant reinforcement from the outside world. And you, warm, perceptive, emotionally fluent you, became the primary source of that reinforcement. Psychologists refer to this as narcissistic supply, but that term can feel cold and clinical, so let's make it real. Narcissistic supply is the emotional fuel a narcissist needs to keep their internal world from collapsing. It is admiration. It is attention. It is the look on your face when they walked in. It is the way you tried to understand them even when they were cruel. It is the energy you spent explaining their behavior to other people, defending them, making excuses, softening the edges of who they really were. It is every time you absorbed their mood so the room wouldn't feel tense. It is every apology you gave when you had done nothing wrong. That was supply. And you were giving it freely, generously, instinctively. Because that is what empaths do. You feel the emotional weather in a room before you even sit down in it. And your natural response is to try to calm the storm. But here's a contrast that nobody draws clearly enough. While you were using your emotional intelligence to heal the space around you, they were using that same intelligence against you. Every time you sensed their discomfort and moved toward it with softness, they learned that discomfort was a tool. Every time you forgave quickly because you genuinely believed in people's capacity to change, they learned that accountability had no real consequences. Every time you stayed up trying to understand why they acted the way they did, they were not doing the same for you. The dynamic was never mutual. You were the emotional architect of a relationship that only one of you was actually building. And this is the part that takes the longest to accept, not because it's complicated, but because it is painful. You were not naive. You were not weak. You were not foolish for loving the way you loved. You were operating from a value system built on empathy, reciprocity, and genuine human connection. The problem was not your capacity to love. The problem was that your capacity to love was being harvested by someone who had no intention of cultivating it in return. So when you left, when you finally chose yourself, you did not just end a relationship. You removed the single most stabilizing force in a narcissist's psychological ecosystem. Think about what that actually means. Picture a structure held up not by its own architecture but by an external support system. that has been there so long, the building forgot it wasn't self-supporting. Now remove that support. The building does not simply adjust, it destabilizes, it shakes. And what lives inside that building, the ego, the false self, the carefully constructed image, begins to feel the tremors immediately. This is where the narcissist's psychological hell begins, not with your departure as an event, but with what your departure reveals. Because when you stop being available, when you stop answering, stop explaining, stop engaging, the narcissist is left alone with something they have spent their entire adult life running from. Themselves, their unregulated emotions, their unexamined shame, the hollow echo of an identity that was never truly built from the inside out. And the silence you leave behind? That silence is not empty. For them, it is deafening, because they cannot argue with it. They cannot manipulate it. They cannot charm it back into compliance. Your absence becomes the one mirror they cannot shatter. And in they begin to see, however briefly, however reluctantly, a reflection of exactly what they lost, and exactly why they lost it. You were never the problem, you were the solution they took for granted. And now that the solution is gone, the problem has nowhere left to hide. Now that you understand what you're leaving actually dismantled, it is time to walk through what happens inside the narcissist's mind in the immediate aftermath of your departure. Because this is where the psychology becomes extraordinary. This is where the mask, the one you spent so long trying to see behind, finally begins to slip. Not in front of the world. The world still sees the performance. But in private, in the moments between the distractions and the new audiences and the carefully curated social media posts, something very different is happening. And understanding it is not about revenge. It is about clarity. It is about you finally seeing the full picture of the dynamic you were living inside, so that you never mistake that kind of relationship for love again. The first thing that happens when you walk away is what psychologists call narcissistic injury. This is not heartbreak in the way you experience heartbreak. When you grieve a relationship, you grieve the person. You miss their laugh, their presence, the way they made you feel on the good days. Your grief is relational. It is rooted in genuine attachment. What the narcissist experiences is fundamentally different. They do not grieve you as a person. They grieve the function you served. They grieve the loss of a mirror that reflected them as they needed to be seen. They grieve the absence of the emotional regulation you provided without either of you fully realizing you were providing it. The pain is real, but its source is not love. Its source is deprivation. And that distinction matters more than almost anything else you will learn in your healing. Here is how that injury tends to express itself in the days and weeks following your departure. The narcissist will almost immediately move into one of two modes, sometimes both in rapid alternation. The first mode is pursuit. This is where the calls come, the messages, the sudden startling vulnerability they never showed you when you were present. This is where they say the things you always needed to hear, with a fluency and an emotional precision that can feel disorienting, because suddenly they sound like the partner you always wanted them to be. They speak your language. Now they use the words. They acknowledge the hurt. They seem to finally understand. And if you are not careful, if you are still in the early stages of waking up, this performance can be devastatingly convincing. But you need to understand what is actually happening in that moment, that SUD. And emotional availability is not growth. It is strategy. It is a retrieval tactic so well documented in psychological literature that it even has a name, hoovering, named after the vacuum brand. Because the intention is to suck you back in. The narcissist is not reaching out because they have changed. They are reaching out because the discomfort of losing their primary source of supply has become intolerable, and the fastest way to relieve that discomfort is to restore the supply. You, your attention, your emotional engagement, even your anger would do, because for someone wired the way a narcissist is wired, even negative attention is preferable to the terrifying emptiness of being ignored. The second mode is devaluation. If the pursuit does not work, if you hold your boundary, if you stay silent, if you refuse to re-enter the dynamic, the narcissist's internal narrative shifts, because their psychological survival depends on maintaining a self-image that is superior, blameless, and justified. And if you will not come back, then the story must be rewritten so that they did not want you back anyway. Suddenly you were always the problem. Suddenly your sensitivity was a flaw, your emotional depth was exhausting, your needs were unreasonable. The relationship that they were just desperately trying to recover is now, in their retelling, something they are relieved to be free of. They may say this to mutual friends. They may post about growth and freedom and new beginnings, and from the outside, it can look like they have moved on with an ease that feels insulting. Do not be fooled by this. And more importantly, do not be wounded by it. Because what you are watching is not indifference. It is defense. The devaluation narrative is a psychological shield constructed in real time to protect a self-image that your absence is actively threatening. If they admitted even to themselves that you leaving was a consequence of their behavior, if they allowed that truth to land, they would have to confront the kind of shame that their entire personality structure was built to avoid. The devaluation is not about you. It was never about you. It is about them and their desperate need to remain the protagonist of a story where they are never at fault. Meanwhile, beneath both of these performances, beneath the pursuit and the devaluation, something quieter and more corrosive is taking place. The narcissist is beginning to feel the full weight of what psychologists call ego fragmentation. Without a consistent external mirror, without you there to reflect their importance back to them daily, their sense of self becomes unstable. They may appear fine to the world. They may find a replacement source of attention quickly, someone new to perform for, someone who does not yet know the patterns. But that new supply is not the same. It does not carry the depth of attunement that you carried. It does not know them the way you knew them. And so the validation feels thinner, less satisfying, like drinking water that has no ability to quench a thirst that was never really about water to begin with. This is the beginning of a cycle that will repeat itself throughout the narcissist's life unless they truly choose, to do the internal work that growth requires. Each new relationship will follow a familiar arc: idealization, then devaluation, then discard or departure. And each time the cycle completes, the underlying emptiness grows louder. Not because they become more self-aware automatically, but because the gap between the image they project and the reality they feel inside becomes harder and harder to bridge. Without someone like you to help carry the weight, you were never just a partner to them. You were infrastructure. And infrastructure, when it is suddenly gone, does not go quietly. You have spent enough time understanding what is happening to them. Now it is time to talk about what is happening to you. Because here's the part of this story that does not get told often enough. And it is the part that matters most. While the narcissist is cycling through pursuit and devaluation, while they are scrambling to replace what they lost on. De-writing history to protect their ego, you are doing something entirely different. You are remembering who you are. And that process, quiet, non-linear, sometimes painful, ultimately profound, is the real story here, not their unraveling. Yours is a return, but let's be honest about what the early days of that return actually feel like. Because if you are in this right now, or if you have recently walked away, you may not feel like someone who made a courageous decision. You may feel like someone who is barely holding it together. You may feel guilt, because empaths almost always do. The guilt that says maybe you gave up too soon. Maybe if you had just communicated differently, loved harder, stayed longer, something would have shifted. That guilt is not evidence that you made the wrong choice. That guilt is evidence of how deeply you are capable of caring. It is a symptom of your empathy, not a signal to go back. There is also grief, real, legitimate, sometimes overwhelming grief. And this grief confuses people, because from the outside, well-meaning friends might say things like, "But they treated you so badly, why are you still sad?" as if the depth of your grief is somehow proportional to the quality of how you were treated. But grief does not work that way. You are not grieving the relationship as it was. You are grieving the relationship. IP as you needed it to be. You are grieving the version of that person you believed in during the good moments, the potential you saw in them that they could never quite commit to becoming. You are grieving the future you imagined, the partnership you deserved, the love you gave that deserved to be matched and never was. That grief is real and it is valid, and it deserves to be honored rather than rushed. What is also happening, though you may not be able to feel it yet, is a recalibration. Your nervous system, which spent months or years in a state of hypervigilance, always reading the room, always anticipating the mood, always bracing for the shift in emotional weather that signaled danger, is beginning to exhale. This process is not immediate. For many empaths, the hypervigilance persists even after the relationship ends, because the body does not instantly receive the memo that the threat is gone. You may find yourself waiting for conflict that does not come. You may feel uneasy in the absence of drama, because drama had become so normalized that peace feels foreign, even suspicious. This is not a flaw in you. This is the residue of a prolonged stress response, and it dissolves with time, with gentleness, and with the conscious decision to stop treating your own calm as something that needs to be earned. Here is the contrast that defines this entire chapter of your life. While the narcissist's world is becoming louder, more frantic, more unstable, more dependent on external sources to feel whole, yours is becoming quieter, and in that quiet, something extraordinary begins to emerge. You start to hear yourself again, your own thoughts, without the constant interference of managing someone else's emotional state, your own preferences, without the distortion of always accommodating someone who could never be satisfied, your own intuition, which you silenced so many times because acting on it felt disloyal, felt like giving up, felt like failing at love. That intuition is still there. It was always there. It was just buried under years of emotional noise that was never yours to carry. This is the moment where your healing stops being about them and starts being about you. And that shift is everything, because for too long, the entire architecture of your inner life was organized around their needs, their moods, their narrative. You woke up thinking about how they were feeling. You made decisions based on what would keep the peace. You measured your worth by your ability to manage a dynamic that was fundamentally unmanageable. And now, for perhaps the first time in longer than you can remember, the central question of your day is not, how do I handle them? It is, what do I actually need? That question may feel uncomfortable at first. Empaths are not always practiced at receiving their own care. The same attentiveness you directed outward toward someone who consumed it without gratitude now needs to be redirected inward. And that redirection is not selfish. It is not a betrayal of your nature. It is the most important thing you will ever do with the gift of emotional intelligence you were born with. Because empathy without boundaries is not a virtue. It is a vulnerability, and you have spent long enough being someone else's open wound. What you are building now, in the aftermath of walking away, is something the narcissist will never be able to take from you again. You are building self-sovereignty, the ability to know your own emotional truth without needing someone else to validate it, the capacity to give generously from a place of fullness rather than from a place of fear, the wisdom to recognize far earlier next time the signs of a dynamic that asks you to make yourself smaller so someone else can feel larger. You are not becoming harder. You are not becoming closed. You are becoming discerning. And discernment is not the opposite of love. It is love's most essential protector. The narcissist is out there right now, either chasing you or replacing you or rewriting the story of you. And none of it changes what is true. What is true is that you chose yourself. What is true is that your leaving was not a failure. Love. It was love's most honest expression, the recognition that you cannot pour from an empty vessel, and that a relationship which requires your emptiness to function is not a relationship worth sustaining. Your silence is not cruelty. Your distance is not coldness. Your decision to stop explaining yourself is not weakness. It is the first full breath you have taken in years, and from here everything begins. There is a question that sits at the center of all of this, one that you may have been circling without quite being able to name it. And the question is this: was any of it real? Was the connection real? Were the good moments real? Were you real in that relationship, or were you simply playing a role in someone else's story without ever being handed the full script? This question matters, because how you answer it will shape everything that comes next. So let's answer it with the honesty it deserves. The good moments were real. For you, the love you felt was real. The hope you carried was real. The effort you made, the sacrifices, the patience, the grace you extended over and over again, all of it was real, because it came from a real place inside of you. Nothing about your experience was a performance. Nothing about the way you loved was manufactured. You showed up as your full, authentic self inside a dynamic that was never designed to honor that. And that is the heartbreak within the heartbreak. Not that you were deceived by a stranger, but that you gave your realest self to someone who was fundamentally unable to receive it. The narcissist's warmth in the early days, the intensity, the attentiveness, the feeling that someone had finally seen you completely, that was also real in the sense that it was genuinely happening. But it was not love. It was acquisition. There is a phase in narcissistic relationships that psychologists call idealization, and it is as intoxicating as anything you will ever experience, precisely because it is calibrated to feel that way. The narcissist, often without conscious calculation, identifies what you most need to feel, seen, chosen, understood, safe, and reflects it back to you with breathtaking precision. You felt seen because they were studying you. You felt chosen because you were being selected. And when the idealization ended, when the warmth cooled and the criticism began and the dynamic shifted into something unrecognizable, the contrast was so sharp it created a psychological whiplash that kept you anchored. You kept trying to get back to the beginning. You kept believing that the person from the early days was the real person, and that everything that came after was a version of them that you could somehow help them outgrow. But here's what you need to carry forward. The version of them you fell in love with was a reflection of your own capacity for connection projected back at you. What you were responding to in those early electric days was partly them, and partly the purest, most hopeful version of yourself. Your desire for genuine intimacy, your belief in people, your willingness to be vulnerable, those qualities are not liabilities. They are not things to be ashamed of or armored against. They are the most valuable things about you. The work now is not to dismantle them. The work is to stop placing them in the hands of people who have not demonstrated they know how to hold them. This is where your story diverges completely and permanently from the narcissists. Because while they are trapped in a cycle, moving from person to person, extracting supply, losing it, searching again, never arriving anywhere that feels like home, you have the capacity to do something they cannot. You can grow. You can integrate this experience. You can take the pain of what happened and metabolize it into wisdom rather than bitterness, into boundaries rather than walls, into a deeper and more precise understanding of what love actually looks and feels like when it is functioning the way it was meant to. Real love does not make you feel like you are constantly auditioning. Real love does not require you to manage another person's emotional reality at the expense of your own. Real love does not leave you lying awake at night, running through conversations, trying to identify the moment where you went wrong, wondering what version of yourself would finally be enough. Real love is not a performance you sustain out of fear of what happens when the performance slips. It is a space where both people are allowed to be fully human, flawed, evolving, sometimes difficult, always accountable, and where the commitment to each other's well-being is genuinely mutual. You know the difference now. And that knowledge, however painfully it was acquired, is permanent. Nobody can take it from you. The narcissist cannot take it from you. The grief cannot take it from you. The self-doubt that still visits you on hard days cannot take it from you. You have been educated by experience in a way that no book, no podcast, no well-meaning advice could have fully taught you. You understand at a cellular level the difference between someone who loves you and someone who needs you, and you will never confuse the two again. So what do you do now? You live, not cautiously, not with walls built so high that nothing beautiful can get in. You live openly, but wisely. You give generously, but discerningly. You trust gradually, allowing people to demonstrate over time, through consistency, through reciprocity, through the small daily evidence of genuine care, that they are worthy of. F, the depth you have to offer. You stop abandoning yourself in the hope that your self-abandonment will make someone else stay. You stop shrinking. You stop explaining yourself to people who are not genuinely trying to understand. You stop measuring your worth by someone else's inability to recognize it. And when you think about the narcissist, because you will, sometimes, especially in